Sometimes the most powerful action isn't speaking up, it's stepping back. When you disappear quietly, you don't need drama, confrontation, or explanations. Your absence alone shifts the dynamic, exposing truth, revealing intentions, and letting his ego face the consequences of its own choices. True power in relationships is often misunderstood. Many people think that being assertive, arguing, or explaining themselves is what establishes authority and respect. In reality, power often comes from restraint, from knowing when to step back, and from letting silence do the talking. When you disappear quietly, you are not withdrawing out of fear or weakness. You are choosing to protect your dignity and your peace. This kind of withdrawal communicates far more than any confrontation ever could, because it carries with it calm, confidence, and self-possession. Silence forces the other person to sit with their own behavior, their own choices, and their own awareness, without the crutch of your explanations or emotional labor. Drama and confrontation are reactive. They signal urgency, emotion, and often vulnerability. When you react strongly, you're giving the other person a sense of influence over your emotions. Even if your intentions are noble, the moment they see that your peace can be disrupted, they subconsciously recognize that they hold power over your emotional state. By contrast, disappearing quietly is proactive. It is a deliberate choice that says, without words, I am not available for dynamics that compromise my dignity. That silence is magnetic because it comes from a place of internal stability, not external pressure. You are not trying to control their reactions. You are controlling your own. Silence communicates clarity. Words are often misinterpreted, debated, or dismissed, but absence leaves no room for argument. When you are consistently present, the other person may take your patience, forgiveness, or availability for granted. They may assume your tolerance is infinite. By disappearing quietly, you remove that assumption. Without your presence, they are forced to notice what they have lost and what they may have failed to appreciate. Your calm absence is a statement. You are aware of your worth, and you are not willing to compromise it to maintain a connection that doesn't honor it. There is also a psychological aspect at play. Humans are wired to seek patterns, predictability, and responses. When you disappear without explanation, you disrupt that pattern. The absence creates a void that the ego cannot ignore. Unlike conflict, which can be argued with or rationalized, silence cannot be negotiated. It leaves the other person with only their own reflection and their own choices to consider. The mind, unused to having its control challenged without noise, begins to analyze, to question, and often to regret. That reflection is far more effective than any argument or confrontation because it comes from internal realization, not external persuasion. For you, the act of disappearing quietly is equally transformative. It shifts your focus back to yourself, your priorities, and your well-being. Instead of constantly explaining, defending, or adjusting yourself to maintain a connection, you reclaim that energy for your own life. You begin to see patterns clearly, notice behaviors that were previously softened or excused, and recognize where boundaries were being crossed. This internal clarity fosters confidence. You no longer feel compelled to chase attention, validation, or reassurance from someone who has not consistently provided it. Your peace becomes your metric of success, not their reactions. Importantly, disappearing quietly is not about punishment or manipulation. It is not a game to make someone feel guilty or to prove a point. It is a conscious choice to prioritize your own dignity. When done with intention, it reflects strength, maturity, and self-respect. You are teaching through presence, or in this case, through intentional absence, that your emotional life is not negotiable. You demonstrate that your time, energy, and heart are valuable, and that they deserve care and respect without compromise. Over time, this kind of quiet authority reshapes dynamics fundamentally. The person who once relied on your explanations, patience, or availability may begin to reconsider their behavior. Some will reflect, some may feel regret, and others may simply fade, revealing their true intentions. But regardless of their reaction, you remain anchored in your own power. Your absence does not depend on their change. It is a declaration of your own standards. True power lies not in chasing attention or eliciting responses, but in maintaining dignity, calm, and self-possession. Disappearing quietly achieves that in a way that words rarely ever can. An ego thrives on reaction. It lives for the confirmation that it still matters, that it can still provoke emotion, and that it holds influence over someone else's state of mind. Every explanation, argument, or display of feeling gives it exactly what it craves. Even when we think we are asserting boundaries or expressing our needs, the ego interprets engagement as relevance, and relevance as power. This is why silence is so effective. It starves the ego of the fuel it depends on. When you stop responding, you create a vacuum. The absence of feedback is disorienting because the ego has nothing to latch onto. It cannot argue, manipulate, or justify without a mirror. It thrives on reflection, and when reflection disappears, panic and discomfort inevitably follow. This is not a form of punishment. It is simply the natural consequence of removing energy from a dynamic where one party has relied on your reactions to feel validated. Most people underestimate how much energy they unconsciously provide to someone else's ego. Every text answered immediately, every explanation offered, every moment spent diffusing tension or softening conflict reinforces the sense of control the ego believes it has. Silence disrupts that pattern. It communicates that your emotional state is no longer negotiable and that you are choosing to preserve your dignity above seeking acknowledgement or validation. Ego panic is subtle at first. It may appear as restlessness, obsessive thinking, or vague attempts to regain attention. Sometimes it shows up as guilt, tripping, or defensiveness when interaction resumes. In every instance, the root is the same. The ego no longer has access to emotional feedback. Without your reactions, it begins to confront the reality that control is illusory. This internal conflict is far more effective than confrontation because it arises from self-reflection rather than external pressure. For you, the act of remaining silent is a reclaiming of power. Instead of giving energy to uncertainty, confusion, or imbalance, you redirect it to your own well-being. Silence allows you to step out of reactive patterns and observe dynamics clearly. You begin to notice where effort was missing, where consistency was lacking, and where emotional labor was one-sided. That clarity is empowering because it is rooted in observation, not hope or persuasion. Silence also reshapes your understanding of boundaries. Boundaries are most effective when they are calm, consistent, and non-negotiable. Reacting or confronting often dilutes them because it introduces negotiation or emotional bargaining. When you withdraw quietly, you enforce your boundaries without argument. Your presence, or in this case, your absence, communicates clearly what is acceptable and what is not. This teaches both you and the other person that emotional stability is not a tool for manipulation but a standard for respect. Over time, this approach cultivates self-trust. You learn that you can hold your own space without constantly checking for reassurance or validation. You become less reactive to uncertainty because your sense of worth is internally grounded, not externally determined. The ego may panic, but you remain steady. That steadiness is magnetic, not because it is a strategy, but because it signals authenticity and self-possession. Importantly, silence is not coldness. It is not withdrawal out of spite or manipulation. It is a conscious choice to remove yourself from a dynamic that does not honor your dignity. By withholding emotional feedback, you create space for clarity, reflection, and self-awareness. You allow the other person to confront themselves without interference, while simultaneously reclaiming your own authority over your life and your emotional state. Ultimately, ego cannot survive without response. When you step back and remain silent, you demonstrate strength, maturity, and control. You no longer allow someone else's reactions to dictate your feelings, your energy, or your peace. Silence is the quietest and often most effective form of influence because it exposes truth without drama, fosters reflection without pressure, and restores power without confrontation. In that space, both parties are forced to face reality, and you emerge grounded, composed, and fully in charge of your own emotional world. When you step back and remove yourself from a situation, something remarkable happens. The dynamics of the relationship shift immediately, not because you are controlling anyone, but because your presence often served as a buffer. While you were constantly available, forgiving, or softening the edges, the other person had a shield that allowed them to avoid full accountability for their actions. Your explanations, reassurances, and compromises often absorbed the impact of choices they might otherwise have confronted. Disappearing quietly removes that safety net, and suddenly reality is inescapable. Without your presence, there is no one to reinterpret their behavior, soften the consequences, or make excuses. The truth, which may have been difficult to face while you were present, becomes unavoidable. This is not about punishing anyone. It is about removing yourself from the role of caretaker, mediator, or emotional translator. You step out of a position where your energy has been used to prop up someone else's ego or deflect the consequences of their choices. In that space, the reality of their actions, intentions, and priorities stands starkly clear. Silence also provides an environment for introspection, not only for them but for you as well. While you were present and engaged, much of your mental energy was devoted to monitoring, adjusting, and managing responses, both yours and theirs. Your attention was scattered, focused on ensuring the relationship maintained some semblance of balance, even when it was uneven. When you withdraw, that mental bandwidth returns to you. You are free to observe, to process, and to reflect on patterns that previously went unnoticed. You begin to see where boundaries were crossed, where effort was lacking, and where emotional labor was one-sided. That clarity is empowering because it is rooted in observation rather than reaction. For the other person, your absence creates a vacuum. Patterns of behavior that were previously unnoticed or ignored become impossible to maintain. Without you there to absorb the effects of their choices, they are forced to reckon with the outcomes themselves. This is the essence of accountability, not something you impose, but something that naturally arises when protective buffers are removed. Your quiet withdrawal allows the other person to face their own actions in a way that confrontation often cannot achieve. Confrontation invites defense, argument, or justification, whereas absence leaves no room for negotiation, only reflection. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. You may notice an internal pull to check in, to explain, or to justify your silence. This is natural because habits of emotional engagement are deeply ingrained, but as time passes, the discomfort diminishes and a sense of empowerment grows. You no longer need to mediate outcomes or ensure clarity. You are no longer responsible for someone else's understanding or behavior. You are simply present in your own life, observing and protecting your peace. This kind of withdrawal is also instructive. It reveals priorities, intentions, and alignment in ways words often cannot. Who makes the effort when you step back? Who stays silent, revealing indifference or avoidance? These insights are invaluable because they provide information without argument or accusation. The answers you receive are not filtered through your influence. They are raw, unmediated, and truthful. Over time, disappearing quietly reshapes how you approach relationships. You no longer see connection as something to negotiate or maintain at any cost. You recognize that genuine interest, respect, and effort will surface naturally when you are not constantly giving or accommodating. This perspective fosters self-respect because you begin to place your peace above the need for validation, and you understand that alignment cannot be forced but only observed. Ultimately, the act of quietly stepping back is a declaration of self-respect and emotional autonomy. It allows the other person to confront reality on their own, and it allows you to reclaim control over your own energy, choices, and emotional stability. In that space, truth emerges, clarity prevails, and you are reminded that your presence is valuable, but only when it is met with integrity, effort, and mutual respect. When you step away quietly, what disappears is not only your presence, it is access. Access is often confused with connection, but they are not the same. While you are consistently available, emotionally responsive, and engaged, it was easy for the other person to feel a sense of closeness without actually investing themselves. Your presence made interaction effortless and convenient, which can be mistaken for genuine interest or commitment. By removing yourself, you eliminate that convenience, forcing clarity and revealing what was always there beneath the surface. Access provides a safety net for someone who might not otherwise prioritize effort. When you are always present, it's easy for them to rely on your patience, forgiveness, or availability to maintain the dynamic. Your energy compensates for inconsistencies, excuses, or lack of initiative. When that access disappears, they must confront the reality that the connection was contingent on your availability, not necessarily their care or intention. This revelation is neither manipulative nor punitive. It is simply the natural consequence of removing the buffer that allowed avoidance or indifference to persist. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects true priorities. Someone who genuinely values you will notice the absence and respond intentionally. Their effort will be consistent, grounded, and aligned with the respect and care you have always offered. Conversely, someone who only appreciated access, convenience, or the comfort of your presence will reveal themselves through inaction, delayed effort, or absence. This distinction, which might have been obscured while you were constantly available, becomes crystal clear. Your absence exposes the truth without the need for confrontation, explanation, or drama. For you, removing access is an act of reclaiming agency. Instead of bending yourself to maintain connection, explaining actions, or managing emotions, you create space for observation and reflection. You no longer carry the weight of someone else's inconsistency or apathy. That space allows you to see patterns clearly, evaluate alignment, and decide consciously how to move forward. The empowerment comes from recognizing that your time, energy, and emotional investment are yours to protect. This withdrawal also redefines your standards. When access is removed, you start to measure effort, intention, and care in ways that are no longer influenced by convenience or proximity. You begin to expect alignment naturally rather than negotiating it through repeated explanations, justifications, or emotional labor. This shift is subtle but transformative because it allows you to operate from a baseline of self-respect rather than hope, fear, or obligation. The psychological impact of lost access is profound. Humans are wired to seek connection and pattern. Sudden absence disrupts that pattern, creating a void that prompts reflection. The other person is left to grapple with the reality of their choices, without the comforting presence of your energy to absorb the impact. This internal reckoning is far more effective than confrontation because it arises naturally from self-awareness rather than being imposed externally. Importantly, removing access does not require grand gestures or dramatic exits. The quiet, intentional withdrawal is far more powerful. It communicates your boundaries clearly, asserts your standards without argument, and demonstrates emotional autonomy. Your presence, or lack thereof, becomes a statement of self-respect and dignity. Over time, this practice of quiet withdrawal teaches discernment. You learn to recognize who is capable of effort without prompting, who respects your boundaries, and who only responds when it's convenient. These insights guide your decisions in relationships, helping you align with people who value and match your energy, rather than those who take it for granted. Ultimately, erasing access is an act of empowerment. It clarifies intentions, exposes true priorities, and restores balance. By stepping back quietly, you assert control over your emotional life, protect your energy, and allow both yourself and the other person to confront reality without interference. In that space, clarity emerges naturally, and the foundation for authentic, mutual connection is revealed. When you choose to disappear quietly, one of the most profound shifts is the restoration of your emotional authority. For far too long, many of us unconsciously surrender our emotional energy to others, responding to messages, moderating reactions, explaining ourselves, and absorbing behaviors that leave us unsettled. This is not weakness. It is simply human nature to invest care and effort into people and situations we value. Yet, in doing so without balance, we often hand over the reins of our emotional state to someone else, allowing their actions, decisions, or inconsistencies to dictate how we feel. By stepping back and choosing silence, you reclaim that authority and take back control over your inner world. Emotional authority begins with the recognition that your peace is non-negotiable. It is not dependent on validation, acknowledgement, or approval from anyone else. When you disappear quietly, you are making a conscious statement. Your sense of stability, calm, and self-worth exists independently of someone else's behavior. This does not mean you stop caring or that you become indifferent. It means you no longer allow external factors to compromise your equilibrium. In doing so, you reclaim a sovereignty over your feelings that had previously been diluted by overinvestment in someone else's ego or inconsistencies. The process of regaining emotional authority is also transformative because it forces you to examine your past patterns. You begin to see where your attention was overextended, where your explanations were unnecessary, and where you softened situations that should have been addressed through boundaries rather than accommodation. This clarity is empowering. It allows you to discern between moments that require engagement and those that require detachment. You realize that not every issue demands a response, not every slight demands justification, and not every feeling requires expression. Sometimes, the most powerful action is doing nothing at all and allowing stillness to assert itself. Silence works as a tool for cultivating self-trust. When you step away, you learn that you can rely on yourself to regulate your emotions, make decisions, and maintain clarity even in uncertainty. You no longer feel compelled to seek reassurance, explanations, or closure from someone who may be unable or unwilling to provide it. This self-reliance builds confidence and strengthens the internal foundation upon which your relationships, and indeed your life, are structured. Emotional authority is about choosing your own responses, rather than reacting impulsively or emotionally to external stimuli. An important aspect of this authority is the realization that your presence is no longer a service to someone else. You are not responsible for managing their feelings, interpreting their actions, or absorbing the consequences of their choices. By reclaiming your emotional energy, you set a precedent for future interactions. Connection is mutual, effort is reciprocal, and respect is expected. Your boundaries are not negotiable, they exist because your well-being matters. This shift is not aggressive, it is calm, measured, and undeniably powerful. Over time, reclaiming emotional authority also reshapes your interactions with others. You become more discerning, choosing where and with whom to invest your time and energy. You recognize that some people will respond positively to your calm and grounded demeanor, while others will be unsettled or challenged by it. Your focus shifts from trying to change them or gain their approval to prioritizing relationships that are aligned, reciprocal, and respectful. This approach creates space for healthier, more balanced connections. Ultimately, the act of disappearing quietly is not about control over someone else. It is about reclaiming control over yourself. It is a declaration that your emotional life, your stability, and your peace are yours to govern. Through silence, you establish a standard for how you expect to be treated, regain the authority to protect your energy, and build the internal resilience necessary to navigate relationships with clarity and strength. In this reclaimed space, you are no longer reactive. You are deliberate, composed, and empowered, and that alone transforms the dynamic entirely. When you choose to disappear quietly, the ultimate reward is the cultivation of inner peace. Peace is not simply the absence of conflict or drama. It is the presence of stability, clarity, and self-respect. Often, we chase validation, reassurance, or engagement from others in the hope that it will provide comfort or certainty. Yet true peace is never found in someone else's actions or attention. It is cultivated within, through conscious choices and boundaries. By stepping back and allowing silence to replace reaction, you establish a new standard for your emotional life, one that is self-sufficient, steady, and resilient. Before this shift, it's common to believe that turbulence, uncertainty, or emotional highs and lows are signs of connection, intimacy, or intensity. We may have equated attention, even inconsistent or manipulative attention, with affection or value. Silence dismantles that illusion. When you withdraw quietly, you no longer participate in the cycle of proving worth, seeking reassurance, or negotiating emotional stability. In that space, you feel how draining it was to rely on someone else for emotional equilibrium, and how liberating it is to reclaim it for yourself. Peace recalibrates your perception of relationships. Behaviors that once felt exciting, intense, or charming now feel unbalanced or unsustainable because your baseline for emotional well-being has changed. You no longer tolerate inconsistency or drama simply for the sake of engagement. Instead, you recognize that true connection is grounded in stability, mutual effort, and respect. This perspective allows you to act from alignment rather than reaction, making choices that honor your needs and your boundaries. As you settle into this quiet peace, your self-trust deepens. You begin to believe in your capacity to handle disappointment, rejection, or indifference without losing your center. This belief transforms how you engage with others. You are no longer chasing outcomes, trying to convince someone of your value, or negotiating attention. You simply observe, assess, and act based on alignment and mutual respect. This calm decisiveness is magnetic not because it manipulates, but because it signals authenticity, confidence, and self-possession. Peace also changes how you define success in relationships. It is no longer measured by whether someone notices, regrets, or chases you. Success is defined by your ability to maintain your composure, preserve your energy, and remain aligned with your values. When someone fails to meet that standard, their inability to respond or invest appropriately becomes information rather than a source of insecurity or panic. Peace reframes loss as clarity and absence as insight, not as failure or personal deficiency. This quiet power also reshapes attraction and interaction. When your energy is grounded in peace, it naturally filters out dynamics that are manipulative, ego-driven, or unsustainable. Those who respect, value, and align with your calm energy are drawn to it, while those who thrive on control, chaos, or drama will find it incompatible. Peace acts as both a shield and a magnet. It protects your emotional well-being while simultaneously drawing in the people and experiences that match your standards. Importantly, peace is not passive. It requires discipline, intention, and consistency. Choosing to remain silent in moments where you might have reacted or explained yourself is an exercise in restraint and self-mastery. Each act of quiet withdrawal strengthens your confidence, reinforces your boundaries, and affirms your dignity. Over time, this internal authority becomes habitual, shaping your life and relationships in profound ways. Ultimately, disappearing quietly and embracing peace is a declaration that your emotional life belongs to you. It signals that your stability, self-respect, and clarity are non-negotiable, and that you will no longer compromise them for drama, attention, or validation. In that stillness, you reclaim control, cultivate strength, and experience a calm that is unshakable. Peace becomes your standard, your compass, and your greatest form of influence, transforming not only how others perceive you, but how you navigate the world and honor yourself in every interaction. Disappearing quietly is not about making someone feel loss or regret. It's about reclaiming yourself. Silence becomes your most powerful statement, exposing truth, restoring emotional authority, and creating space for clarity. When peace becomes your standard, you no longer chase validation or tolerate imbalance. Instead, you move through life grounded, self-respecting, and fully in control of your energy and choices.